Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we're doing another Power Rankings video. Week 7 of the NHL has happened, and there's actually some major movement in the top 10. We'll get to what changes have happened over the past week, coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Intent Hockey channel. Now before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you all your support. We're doing what's up to you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment down in the comment section below so you can also listen to this video. So as usual, we got another Power Rankings video here. We got week 7. As usual, we've got our top 10 teams plus 4 honorable mentions. So we'll once again do all of that in this video here. So once again, as usual, we'll start with our 4 honorable mentions. And once again, there were 3 teams who actually had pretty good weeks last week. So our first honorable mention to start with is the Columbus Blue Jackets. After having a solid win over Boston 2 weeks ago on Monday, we saw last week them have a pretty good week. They wound up in a high-scoring back-and-forth game, come back from down 3-0 early on, and wound up beating Tampa 7-6 in overtime. And then they were able to score a late equalizer and beat the Carolina Hurricanes 5-4 in a shootout. So their goaltending isn't where it needs to be right now, and defensively they definitely have some improvements, but their offense has scored 12 goals in the last 2 games, 17 in the last 3 if you include the Boston game. Their offense is clicking on all cylinders. They've started to win a couple of games. They were 2-0 last week. They had a pretty decent week last week, so I'm going to put them here as an honorable mention. Nowhere close to being a top 10 team. They're still hovering around the 500 mark. They're not a completely great team at this point in time, but they're still a pretty good team, had a pretty good week, so I'm putting that as my 4th honorable mention. Still have to work on the defensive aspect of things, but offensively that team's clicking, so I'm putting that as my 4th honorable mentions. My 3rd honorable mention is the Vancouver Canucks. Last week, the Canucks didn't have an overly great week. They went 1-1-0. They lost 4-3 to New York Rangers to open the week, thanks to a late game-winning goal from Chris Kreider, and then they beat the Ottawa Senators, holding off a late comeback attempt 4-3. So Senators were slumping at that point in time. Rangers haven't been overly great, so to see the Canucks go 1-1-0 isn't overly fantastic. You would have liked them to see them win both those games, but it was close in both those games, and they come away with 2 of a possible 4 points, so it wasn't bad for the Canucks. They're still one of the top teams in the Pacific Division, have games in hand on everyone, so I'm not going to put them in my top 10 at this point in time, given how mediocre of a week they had last week, but they're still a pretty good team. They did those things without Miller, Besser, Demko. They're still dealing with some injuries, but still, that defense looking pretty good, and offensively with guys like Pettersson, Nebraska starting to hook up on some goals, Heinen, like that team's looking pretty good. So I'm having them as my 3rd honorable mention. My 2nd honorable mention is the Seattle Kraken. We had them in my honorable mentions last week too. This week they won a decent 2-1-0, had a narrow loss to Los Angeles back on Saturday 2-1, so that was an interesting game, but they did narrowly lose to them. It wasn't an overly bad game there from the Kraken, and then they shut out the Predators earlier in the week, and yesterday they wound up just edging out the Anaheim Ducks 3-2, so it wasn't a bad week there for the Kraken, getting a couple of decent wins against lower end teams and barely missing out on a win against a really good Pacific Division opponent. So like I said, they're still hovering around 500. I'm not going to put them in my top 10 at this point in time, but the Kraken had a pretty good week. I mean, defensively they've held them to 4 goals in the last 3 games, which is pretty good. So Decor, Grubauer are looking good, and that defense is looking solid, while offensively some guys are clicking, like Bjorkstrand, like Schwartz is doing well. Wright got a goal in the last game, so good stuff there for Seattle, as I bumped them in my 2nd honorable mentions. And my 1st honorable mentions is someone who I considered for a long period of time this week putting into my top 10, but I'm going to have them barely miss out on the top 10 this week, is the Tampa Bay Lightning. This week was a pretty good week for the Bolts, went 2-1-1, started out the week with an overtime victory over Pittsburgh, coming from behind to win, so that was a pretty good game. They then had an overtime loss like we just talked about against Columbus, so it was a high scoring affair, did not look overly good in that one. Then they had a narrow loss to Dallas Stars 4-2, so it was a pretty decent game in that one, and then they absolutely annihilated the Avalanche 8-2. So impressive performance against the Avalanche. Won an overtime game, lost an overtime game, lost a narrow game against Dallas. So it wasn't a fantastic week for the Bolts. You would have liked to see them come away with the victory over Columbus. You would have liked to see them beat Dallas, but still, 5 out of a possible 8 points isn't too bad. And I'm going to have them as my top honorable mention here, just outside top 10. Like Kucherov's looking good, Gensel, Hagel had a 5 assist night in that Avalanche game. Defensively, like we said, they could definitely use some more improvements, but still Vasilevsky's looking pretty good. The defense is holding on pretty strong, so really good stuff there, but I'm going to have the Bolts as my last honorable mention. And now we're going into the top 10. Now before we get into the top 10, I'm going to tell you that 2 teams who were in my top 10 last week have fallen out after abysmal weeks, and that is the New York Rangers and the Florida Panthers. Both who are in my top 10 fell out after last week's performance. I mean, they had atrocious weeks. For the Rangers, they beat the Canucks, like we said. That was a pretty good for the Rangers, but then they wound up losing, I can't remember who it was to the first loss of the week the Rangers had. bad, but then they got absolutely shell-shocked by Edmonton and lost yesterday to St. Louis with a combined score of 11-4. So they're not looking overly good right now. So for at least the time being, I'm going to bump the Rangers out. Panthers did even worse. They went 0-4-0. They wound up losing 7-4 to the Avalanche. They lost 6-3 to the Jets. They lost yesterday 4-1 to the Capitals. And on Thursday, they got stunned by the Blackhawks 3-1. Like, they have had an abysmal week too. So the Panthers and Rangers, who were in my top 10 last week, are bumped out. Not even good enough for my honorable mentions at this point. So bad stuff there for FLO and New York are. So we do have a couple of new debuts in our top 10 power rankings for this week. And for the first time since week 2, we had the Calgary Flames in our top 10. The Flames this past week won 3 of the possible 4 games, went 3-1-0. They had a fantastic week. Had a 3-game winning streak snapped yesterday against the Ottawa Senators when they lost 4-3. But before that, they had a show victory over the Islanders, a narrow victory over the Rangers, and a show victory over the Wild. So it wasn't pretty wins, and they were all really close, tightly contested games, but they won 3 out of possible 4 games. I've said that I'm going to start putting teams to win 3 games in a week into my top 10, or at least honorable mentions, and the Flames had a fantastic week. So narrowly edging out Minnesota was fantastic. Being the Rangers in regulation was great. They edged out the Islanders, which was all right. They also lost against Ottawa, but it was a decent and really close game. So a pretty good week there for the Flames, going 3-1-0. Wolf is looking fantastic. He's having a fantastic year, probably one of the Calder favorites. Defensively, even if they don't have a lot of weapons, Uyghur, Miramanov, Bakal, Bean, Barry, like, they're all doing pretty good. And offensively, you got Sharangovich, Huberto, Coronado, Backlund, Coleman, like, they're all producing really well. So Flames are looking really good. Had 3 of a possible 4 wins this week, and I'm going to put them at my 10th spot in the power rankings. At number 9 is the debut in the power rankings of the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres had a pretty phenomenal week last week, going 3-0-0. They had a California road trip, swept the California road trip, shut out the Kings 1-0. Then they were able to narrowly edge out the Anaheim Ducks 3-2 in overtime and came from behind to beat the Sharks 4-2. Not overly impressive teams to beat, but they have won 3 straight. They're 2 games above 500 now, and at one point on Saturday they were 3rd in the Atlantic, only 2 back of Florida for 2nd in the Atlantic. So the Buffalo Sabres have looked really good lately, especially after their 0-3-0 start. They're looking really good. And I'm going to put them at number 9 in my power rankings. They're looking really good offensively, even without Thompson, Krebs, Cozens, Tuck, all those offensive weapons, Peterka, Kulik, they're all looking really good. Defensively, Dahlin, Power, they're all looking really good. And even in net, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen and Reimer are looking fantastic. So after a solid week, I'm moving Buffalo up to number 9. And number 8, I have the Vegas Golden Knights. I bumped them up from 1 spot from last week. They had a fantastic week last week too, also winning 3 of a possible 4 games. The start of the week wasn't overly good. They got shut out by Toronto, but then they wound up beating the Ottawa Senators, annihilating the Montreal Canadiens, and having a stunning comeback to come from behind and beat Philly in a shootout. So pretty good games. Like, their offense is clicking in all cylinders besides that Toronto game. Eichel, Barbashev, Dorofeev, like, they're all looking really good. Defensively, maybe need to tighten up a little bit more, but still, like, Hill's looking really good. Samsonov's especially looking really good so far for the Knights. And their defense, Hanifin, Theodore, McNabb, Pietrangelo, like, they're all looking really good. So I'm going to put the Knights up to number 8. At number 7, we have the Toronto Maple Leafs, another team who was bumped up 1 spot from last week. They were also undefeated last week, going 2-0-0. We just talked about them being Vegas, shutting them out, and then they had a narrow win on Sunday over Utah. So not overly fantastic wins, but their offense is looking good. Nylander, Marner, Tavares are stepping up with guys like Nyes and Matthews out. Defensively, they're looking really solid with McCabe and Riley and Tanev, and they're all looking really good. And in net, Woll and Stores are having themselves a season. So Leafs are looking really good. Had a fantastic week last week, and I'm putting them in my number 7 spot. At number 6, I'm leaving the Minnesota Wild. They had a pretty good week last week, going 2-1-1. Like we talked about, they lost in the shootout to Calgary. They also fell at the hands of the Winnipeg Jets, so that was bad news there. But they also had 2 wins last week, having a pretty good game against the Edmonton Oilers when Kirill Kaprizov got injured, and they also had a pretty good game against St. Louis earlier before then. So pretty good week there for the Wild. 5 out of a possible 8 points. Still looking like a pretty good team. Still 2nd in the Central Division, so I'm going to keep them at number 6 in my power rankings. Like, even though Kaprizov's gone down, Boldy's stepping up, Johansson stepping up. There's a couple of other really good guys like Faber, Spurgeon on the defensive end. Like, they're all looking fantastic. And in that, Gustafsson and Fleury are still pretty sound goaltenders. So all in all, the Wild looking pretty good. And after getting 5 out of 8 points last week, I'm going to keep them at number 6. At number 5, we're dropping a team, and that's the Washington Washington Capitals. Caps didn't have an overly great week last week. I did have them last week at number 1, but since then Ovechkin got injured. After that, they sort of had a sour week. Not too bad, but they did lose 2-1 to the Avalanche. They lost 3-2 to the Devils before being, like we said, Florida 4-1. So it wasn't an overly bad week. Those are all 3 really good teams. Panthers are a good team. Avalanche are starting to get their mojo back, and the Devils have always played them really hard. So those are all really good teams. So to see them go 1-2-0 is not too surprising, especially with them not having Ovechkin, but still, you would like them to probably get at least 1 more point out of one of those 2 earlier games. But still, defensively, goaltending wise, they've been fantastic this week with Lindgren and Thompson in net and their defensive core. Offensively, might need some more help, but McMichael looked good. Ellergoff's first couple as a Capital since being reacquired by them. There was also a couple of other guys who got on the score sheet, Dubois. So pretty good week there for the Capitals, but after going 1-2-0, I dropped them from 1st last week to 5th now. At 4th, we had the Dallas Stars. For the Stars, they didn't have an overly bad week. They went 2-1-0. They beat the San Jose Sharks, which is to be expected. They also, like we just talked about, handed the Tampa Bay Lightning a loss, their only regulation loss of the week. So that was a pretty good thing for the Dallas. And then they also had a 3-1 lead yesterday against Carolina, but gave up 5 of the last 6 goals and lost 6 for the Carolina. So that was an embarrassing loss, and that's why I had them at 4th, maybe not a tiny bit higher. But Dallas had a pretty good week, going 2-1-0, winning 2 out of a possible 3 games. It was pretty good for them. Like offensively, they're still clicking. Duchesne, Sagan, Marchment, Johnston, Stankoven, like they're all doing really good. Defensively, they're still a pretty sound team, and Andre and Smith are giving them pretty solid goaltending. So all in all, Stars had a pretty good week, going 2-1-0. I'm going to have them at number 4 in my power rankings this week. And number 3 in my power rankings is the Carolina Hurricanes. They didn't do an overly bad week last week, going 2-1-1. The Carolina Hurricanes, who were 2nd in my power rankings last week, went 2-1-1. Didn't do overly bad. They got a win over the Philadelphia Flyers. Then they lost to New Jersey Devils. Then they got a shootout loss against the Columbus Blue Jackets, as we talked about, before having that stunning win over the Dallas Stars, like we just talked about. So 2-1-1, 5 of a possibility points. Not too bad there from the Hurricanes. You probably want to see them come away with the victory over the Jackets or put up a little bit more fight against the Devils. But they had a pretty fantastic week. Nate just is still clicking. Aho's looking good. Sveshnikov's doing good. Jarvis is back now. He had a fantastic game last night. Defensively, Orlov, Jarvis, Burns, like they're all doing really good. They don't have Kochetkov. They don't have Anderson in net, which does hurt them. But even with guys like Martin, they're still winning games. So Hurricanes are looking really good. They're overcoming adversity. I do drop them from 2nd to 3rd, but they're still looking like a pretty good team. So I'm going to keep them at number 3. At number 2, we had the return of the Winnipeg Jets after I dropped them to 3rd last week and bumping them back up to 2nd. Not good enough right now for 1st, but they had a pretty good week, going 3-1-0. They lost to Nashville Predators, which wasn't overly good, but then they beat the Minnesota Wild. They beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. They had another win there. I can't remember who it was against, but they had 3 solid wins, even though they weren't against overly fantastic teams. The other one was against the Florida Panthers. So they beat Minnesota, they beat Florida. Those are fantastic wins. They also beat Pittsburgh, lose to Nashville. So they had a pretty good week, going 3-1-0. Their offense is still clicking with Connor, Velarde, Lowry. Baron had a couple of goals last week, so they're looking pretty good offensively. Defensively with Pionk, Morrissey, they're sound defensively. And in that, Hellebuck and Comrie are still doing pretty good, even though they gave up 4 goals to Nashville. So all in all, a pretty good week there for the Winnipeg Jets. I'm going to have them at number 2. And my new number 1 team is a team who's already been number 1 earlier in the year in one of my earlier power rankings videos, and that's the New Jersey Devils. The Devils last week, just like a couple of other teams, were undefeated, went 3-0-0. Like we just talked about, they beat the Carolina Hurricanes. We also beat the Washington Capitals, and they beat the Nashville Predators, and they did it in impressive fashion. So pretty good things there from the Devils. They're looking really good. The Hughes brothers are looking good. Hamilton, Siegenthaler, Pesce on the blue line are looking pretty good. Markstrom and Allen and Net are producing solid goaltending for that Devils team. Hischier just had a hat trick up front. Palat's looking good. Hall is looking good. Myers looking good. Bratt's looking good. Like that team is looking lethal right now. So after going 3-0-0 and having a solid week last week, I'm going to put the Devils at number 1 in my power rankings. So pretty good week last week from all of these teams. Lots of interesting results. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this down in the comment section below, so I want to talk for today. But just to recap here, my week 7 power rankings are number 10, the Calgary Flames, number 9, the Buffalo Sabres, number 8, the Vegas Golden Knights, number 7, the Toronto Maple Leafs, number 6, the Minnesota Wild, number 5, the Washington Capitals, Number 4, the Dallas Stars. Number 3, the Carolina Hurricanes. Number 2, the Winnipeg Jets. And number 1, returning, is New Jersey Devils. So that's my power rankings. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this down in the comment section below. And what are your power rankings at this point in time? That's all I want to talk for today. Until this video, if you're like to subscribe down below. Thank you all for your support. We're never to without you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so you can also listen to this video. Also the blog, talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. Leave a link down in the description below. And can't see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.